Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Majlis. I'm your host, Yasmin Khoyatler. With me today, I have Karen Elliott House. Karen, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Quick intro before we get started. Karen is an American journalist who has been reporting on the Middle East for quite some time. She has won the Pulitzer Award for her work, and she has also written a book on Saudi Arabia and is currently working on her second one. So definitely very knowledgeable on the region and very excited to have this conversation with you today. Would love to get started by asking when your interest in the region first began.
I became the diplomatic correspondent for the Wall Street Journal in January of '78, right after Sadat went to Jerusalem. So the Middle East was kind of the biggest issue. And I came out here to, I'd never been to any country out here, so to visit Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Saudi Arabia. So my first trip was in 1978, May 1978.
Wow. Yeah, and at the time, Saudi wasn't open to just any visitor, right?
Yeah, the embassies were in Jeddah, not Riyadh. There weren't very many hotels. I was required to stay with the Saudi ambassador because I was a single, unaccompanied woman out here. So it was extremely different from now.
And over the years, your focus has shifted also more towards specifically Saudi Arabia and reporting on the changes happening here, the foreign policy relationships. How would you sort of describe that interest evolving from '78 to, let's say, the 2000s?
Yeah, well, gradually I became more. Actually, the first time I came here, I was completely intrigued by Saudi Arabia because I'm from a tiny town in Texas where my father was like a Saudi father. He was the head of the household. We were not allowed to wear shorts or pants, no alcohol. There was nothing to do in my town except 4 churches, so church was the only entertainment. So I found Saudi Arabia quite compatible, and just really it was very intriguing that people were very interesting to me. I mean, the country then was much more, quote, normal. Men and women were mixing. People were drinking alcohol. I think it was not supposed to be, but they were. And then, of course, after the Iranian Revolution, everything tightened up in this country. And it became, at some level, even more interesting. And the Saudis started trying to buy sophisticated American planes and AWACS and weaponry. And so there was just a lot going on here that interested me, in addition to energy. Prior to being diplomatic correspondent, I had been an energy reporter for the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, wow, that's a great sort of correlation.
So, yeah, it was the whole place just became, I'm repeating myself, more and more interesting to me to try to understand what was changing then in the country into more religiosity. And the people. But in those days, you came to Riyadh or Jeddah, stayed in a hotel, the Ministry of Information picked you up to take you to meet a minister, took you back to the hotel, and, basically you weren't supposed to leave, and there was no place to go, and you couldn't drive, and, so when I retired from the Journal in 2006, I was really desperately interested in spending time in the kingdom to see the kingdom and to see people, not to see a hotel room.
Right.
And Adel El-Jubeir, who had worked in the Washington Embassy, helped me get permission, and I managed to go to every province in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, wow.
And it was interesting because most Saudis didn't travel that much around.
Ashamed to
They
say
say,
I still
"Oh,
don't."
you've been there, you've been there. I've never been there." But that was really terrific. I met all kinds of people, princes, Bedouins, poor people, rich people, religious people. Very, very fascinating. And I wrote my first book.
Yeah, I think we actually met when I was much younger in the Eastern Province where I grew up for the first time.
I visited your father
Yes.
first in the Marriott Hotel in Tehran, I think. And then he took me to meet your mom and you. And yeah, so my association with your father is older, almost older than you.
Yeah, that's quite interesting to think about. And when you were visiting these places in the late 2000s, early 2010s, versus, that was when you were writing your first book, and then now visiting in the 2020s and writing your second book. I imagine, it's a shock to me how much the kingdom has changed.
Yeah.
I imagine for a foreigner, it's also quite a shock.
I mean, it is truly unrecognizable in Riyadh. I mean, Jeddah used to be the lively place with business and, people doing things. And
the
Riyadh
saying used
was
to be Jeddah ghair, which is, Jeddah's different.
Yeah, and Riyadh was kind of the stodgy, sleepy place. And now Riyadh is on steroids. Just I arrived here once in the 80s and was not allowed out of the airport because I was a single woman.
Despite being, were you married at the time, or?
Oh, I was married, but I was
were
unaccompanied. Yes. And they, finally called Prince Bandar, who was then the ambassador, and he told them to let me out. But now obviously you arrive and you see women everywhere doing everything. And I went to Al Ula in November. The helicopter pilot was a young woman.
Wow.
5'2" maybe, tiny woman in tan slacks, a white shirt with stripes on her shoulders, short hair. She slammed the door of the helicopter, big heavy door, and just women doing everything and people having fun in Saudi Arabia. And fun used to be truly a dirty word. You were not supposed to waste your time on things other than focusing on, you weren't supposed to focus on the here and now, but on the hereafter. And a lot of people seem to do that. And now people are just, everything moves at so much faster speed, all the development. The fact that the Crown Prince, in essence, managed to take the religious police off the street without any seeming problem was astounding to me. And that people have accepted the changes. Initially, in 1617, people would say it's too fast. People would say, he's doing, he wasn't doing the right things. And then basically after sort of COVID, everybody seemed totally convinced. Enough things had happened in the country, and the country handled COVID so well that, most of the people I talked to stopped saying it's too fast, it won't last, it's top down, not bottom up. And now people seem to be in harness, working night and day to make the vision achievable.
I agree. I think the sentiment in the country is overwhelmingly positive, and everyone is so excited about all of the different changes happening. And I would love to know, because obviously you are meeting a lot of people for your books, whether this is, ministers or just the common person, and what are some of the key policies that you've noted that you think are particularly successful in pushing, or what are sort of the thought process behind, all of these different changes and ways forward?
Yeah, what really intrigues me is that the Crown Prince is very young. I mean, I guess he's about to be 40 this year, but that's still, I'm 76. That's very young. And, that somebody said to me, he can't have wisdom at that age because he doesn't have experience. But he has a thought process that somehow he sees forward, and I think that's incredibly important. That he has all these big plans, and he knows that you have to achieve them. You can't just talk about them. Right. Seeing is believing, as we say in America. And so when he starts something, he seems to have figured out how to organize people to finish it, and he's modestly says, I'm not the only reformer, that, King Faisal brought women's education, and King Fahd brought petrochemical industries, etc. But that he's in a line, and he's going to do his part to change Saudi Arabia in a big way, not a slow, gradual way. I like, this economic transformation is clearly as big as the Chinese transformation. Not as many people, but Deng Xiaoping, when he began economic reform in China, said, we are going to cross the river by feeling the stones, meaning moving slowly and cautiously, feeling the stones. The Crown Prince is not feeling the stones. He just dived in, and he had the confidence to swim. And he's still swimming, sort of the 100-yard dash. I just find the speed of things in the country, especially, I can't think of anybody that's done it so fast. I've read a lot about Peter the Great, the Russian, who wanted to modernize Russia, and he cut the beards off of his people, and he learned to build ships, and he learned to pull teeth, and he felt himself a doctor. He tried to do everything, but things didn't happen nearly so fast. Just the speed of this is, and somehow the Crown Prince seemed to have the understanding that, and I think it's true, young people were ready to move, and the focus on trying to improve education so people have the skills matched to the skills they need to develop Vision 2030. There's just an enormous amount of thought and precision put into the whole process, which, as an American, where we don't seem to have much precision, I find it both fascinating and admirable.
There is definitely a lot of, so many new entities have been set up just to be able to sort of handle every single aspect of the vision because it is quite so grand. I mean,
And all of the focus on KPIs.
yes.
But that, I mean, the jargon in America too among business consultants is you can't, if you can't measure it, you can't achieve it. But here they don't just create them, they actually do follow through and pay attention to, are we meeting, and the fact that the government now talks to itself. I mean, when I started coming here meeting ministers, the Ministry of Information was completely separate from the Ministry of Commerce, from the Ministry of Industry, from the Ministry of Oil. I mean, everybody was doing their thing, and if they contradicted each other, it didn't seem to matter to anybody. And ministers kind of came to work at 11 o'clock in the morning and went home at lunchtime and came back from 5 to 7. And, this sort of 14, 16, 18-hour workday stuff is a new invention in Saudi government under the Crown Prince.
It is quite a drastic, hard change to adjust to. I mean, for people who have been used to a certain way that the public sector, protects them and sort of cushions for a very long time, to then actually be driving forward significant change, it requires a huge shift in mindset.
And do young people like you feel like you're working too hard, or are you happy to be working so hard?
I mean, I think we're all happy to be, well, I shouldn't say we all. I will speak for myself, but I think working towards this type of change that we're seeing, as you said, nowhere else in the world, not in a geographic sense or in terms of like a linear through time sense. So it's truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be a part of, and I feel honored to be working towards it as well.
So many young Saudis say that, I mean, and I remember coming here again in like 2005, and a Saudi said to me, I went to a restaurant last night and I was waited on by a Saudi. I was so embarrassed I didn't know what to do, because Saudis did not want to do that kind of work. And now you see Saudis doing all kinds of work with great pride. I mean, in Al Ula, I visited with a lot of, young women who are running a dining room or are serving tables and, are working in other parts of the hotel and very happy. They had planned to go to the U.S. because there's nothing to do, but then they, heard about Vision 2030 and, all kinds of people. It's like, I use the analogy, I don't know, do you know what the Pied Piper is? The story about the Pied Piper, he piped this tune, yes, and all the children followed him. I think it was in Germany. That the Crown Prince is a bit of a Pied Piper. He is playing his Vision 2030 tune, and all the Saudis are following, saying what you just said. It's an opportunity of a lifetime, and I want to be here, so I'm not staying in London. I'm not staying in New York. I'm not staying in wherever. They're coming back following the tune, which again I find fascinating, and participating at all kinds of levels with pride.
Yes.
Not, I'm only serving ice cream in a restaurant. I mean, people all seem to hold their head up and be a proud Saudi.
And it's true. It's not even just at different service levels, but it's in also a wider range of industries than we've ever had before. You have so many Saudis now in the creative spaces, in the food and beverage space, and in aerospace, which was not something that we thought were options growing up, of different fields to grow into. So it really does incentivize one to come back.
Yeah, when I was doing my first book, I met a rap singer in Jeddah, and it was kind of almost undercover, and now you have Middle Beast, hosting concerts, and people running studios like this. I mean, Saudi's doing everything. I went to a fashion show here, and a Saudi man who wanted to be a designer in the 2005-6 time went to Australia and then realized, he couldn't do that in this country. So he stayed there, but as soon as things changed, he's back here. So there are Saudis, in every the number of industries and opportunities has expanded, and Saudis have expanded to fill them. It's really fascinating to me that people don't say, well, if I can't be a vice president, I don't need to work.
Yeah.
I mean, they're doing all kinds of things, and I think that's a real credit, if I may say so, to the Crown Prince, that somehow he and the team and the vision seem to have motivated people to want to make the best of themselves, whatever that is.
Why do you think that is? Do you think there was, a case of the people were simply ready for this and they needed the right outlet for it? Or do you think there's been some form of policy or some form of specific change enacted that really enabled this flow of industry and new forms of employment?
I think it's both. I mean, I think the Vision 2030 and all of that has created new industries and new opportunities, but Saudis have chosen to accept them. And I think there were a lot of Saudis. Again, when I was doing the first book, there was enormous frustration among young people here who talked about corruption, hypocrisy, that we can't do anything, but the royals can, or this person can, or that, and they weren't. I think it demotivated them. They just kind of didn't. Everybody was waiting for something, and I must admit, when I did that book, I thought Saudi Arabia's future didn't look like this. That it was likely to have one old man after another, as Saudis then talked about the lost decades from 95 to 2005 at the time, and that was likely to continue. You would have another elderly king who didn't have a vision, and if he did, he wouldn't have had time to realize it. And like the old Soviet Union with Chernenko and Brezhnev and Andropov, and suddenly here is Mohammed bin Salman, and he's not an old man. He's then I think 29-year-old at the so it was. I had actually met him once in 2010 with his father when I interviewed his father for the first book, and he was governor of Riyadh then, and the young man was with him, tall, slim, but I mean, I obviously didn't know him, and most Saudis didn't seem to know him when he became first came out. So I mean, it's such a fascinating place. I hope that all of the turmoil around Saudi Arabia can continue to be managed, and the development, does proceed. I mean, it's you have no choice but to proceed.
Because I mean, you're facing as if the domestic challenges of diversifying from oil weren't enough. There's also the outward pressures from all over the Middle East that Saudi needs to handle.
I personally don't think that oil is any kind of problem here, because the world is going to need oil long beyond what the climate change Greens would like, and Saudi Arabia is going to have it. I mean, right now, you all could produce 3.5 million barrels, and the rest of the world put together couldn't produce half of that. So I think in that sense, Saudi Arabia is going to become more and more important on oil.
Mm-hmm.
So when I frequently, and a lot of other people say the kingdom wants to wean itself off oil,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that makes it sound like they don't want to sell oil anymore,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not really wean yourself off, it's add
On top.
other things beyond oil. And that's what the country seems to be doing relatively quickly with educated women, tourism, minerals, um, all kinds of things that are developing. Entertainment, sports, and entertainment and sports help tourism, and it's all becoming self reinforcing.
Right. But all that, I mean, obviously there's been great progress made, and it's incredible to witness it
Mhm.
and be a part of it. For all types of change, there's challenges and there's, roadblocks that we have to overcome. Have you seen that as you visit here, as you talk to people, of sort of what are some of the key gaps that we need to fill in order to realize the vision?
Most of the people I talk to talk about education and skills,
Mm-hmm.
sophisticated skills that the country needs, and matching education to assure that the country gets those. I mean, as you know, 20 years ago, many people were getting degrees in Islamic studies,
Yes.
and that doesn't qualify you to be a scientist, an engineer, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think that is a focus, and it should be a focus. How do you change the education to take some of the negative stuff that's in textbooks, but more importantly, how do you match education to the skill needs of the country? And I mean, this country is doing a lot for what we would call continuous education in America,
Mm-hmm.
but to keep retooling people for the challenges that are coming. So as the country's workforce goes up the ladder of sophistication, to have the people to supply that. And obviously, all of these changes in the country makes it more attractive to foreign experts to live here. Nobody particularly wanted to live here very long when you couldn't go to a movie and your wife couldn't go out without a mail, and there was no place to go out and eat, and the religious police were monitoring you if you did go out. So a lot of these changes make the country much more attractive for not just foreign investment, but
Mm-hmm.
foreign expertise. And I think the country, in part, counts on some of the international expertise to help train domestic expertise,
Right.
so that the skill level rises as the demands, development demands rise.
And the hope there is that with the foreign expertise, there's also a certain level of skill and knowledge transfer, and not simply,
Yeah, exactly. To
raising
train
children.
and transfer the whole defense localization
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
effort. A large part of that is taking international expertise of people that invest
Mm-hmm.
here to create whatever their contribution to the local defense is, and transfer the knowledge and skill
Right.
along with it. And that obviously also helps the GDP, because instead of spending the money on American or French or British or whose ever weaponry, you're spending it on your own and maybe indeed exporting some of that to earn. I mean, that's something the country has to do, is find more exports to earn revenue from than oil, whether it's autos or or whatever. So far, that one isn't moving real fast, but some exports that you can earn revenue from.
I mean, some would argue some of the most successful exports right now is sort of the sports play, right? After having successfully taken a lot of popular football players and with the live golf tournaments, there's a lot that happens here that could then potentially attract, tourism and foreign investment.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume, well, as you know, I'm sure the goal for 2030 on tourism was 100,000 people, and that has been
long
achieved. It's like the goal for women's participation at 34 or whatever it was, and it hit 37 already. So I mean, that's good that goals are being surpassed and rejiggered to keep the momentum. But yeah, I mean, I thought the Crown Prince's comment to Brett Baer about, if it grows my GDP 1%, I'll continue to do sports washing, or whatever that. Not quoting him exactly, but all of the sports clearly raises revenue, and it raises tourism because people are coming here to see these stars, and then they are spending money on.
Right. I mean, if they're in Saudi in Riyadh for a match, they might as well also go to Alula, see the place, explore it.
And the interesting thing is, I think Saudi Arabia has really, I mean, I'm a big believer in Saudi tourism. It has really, I mean, Alula is smashingly beautiful and historically interesting. I'm interested in history, and Saudi Arabia has fantastic history. I mean, I am a Christian, but the Apostle Paul came to Arabia after his encounter on the road to Damascus with Jesus. I mean, there's so much history, and Moses coming here, and and going to Jebel Lawz, and is that really the real Mount Sinai? And there's so much history here that in Texas we don't have. I mean, Texas is, like the whole United States is a pimple on the history of Saudi Arabia, but it's a few hundred years, not several thousand years.
Yeah, and now that we're really tapping into pre-Islamic history as well, as you're mentioning, it's getting a lot more interesting. I
find that interesting that the religious conservatives used to say anything pre-Islamic was how do you say the word, jahiliya, or ignorance.
Oh, jahiliya.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now the Crown Prince is opening up places like Alula and Hegra, and that are definitely pre-Islamic.
Yeah, and it's we've sort of created that harmony of these are the people that came before and these were their beliefs, and not there's nothing wrong with that inherently. So it's doing the tours of Hegra, especially because they have locals do it, it's quite interesting to witness. I don't know about you, but my tour guide when I went to Hegra was a young Saudi woman as well.
She said what?
She was just a young Saudi woman.
Oh, yeah, mine too.
Yeah,
it's another thing that have women seem to be all over the tour guide world. some with faces covered, some without, and telling you history. And I always try to read before I go so I can make sure if I think they're accurate. And, obviously somebody is, you know, preparing and schooling these people. But, women, again, who some of those are the ones that told me they, would have worked in a PR in a company or gone to the U.S. or something like that. But now here they are presenting their culture and their country and, again, seemingly with great pride.
Yeah, I think one thing about that is, when we're talking about these tour guides being trained, is a lot of this is being done majority by the public sector, right? So the tourism in Alula is run by the Tourism Commission within the Royal Commission of Alula.
Mm-hmm.
And you've never seen, this level of public sector involvement in every industry, sort of leading it or heavily supporting it before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of concern about, is that sustainable? Will the private sector be able to eventually support itself?
Mm-hmm.
So curious to know if you've given some thought to that.
Yeah, that's one of the things I try to talk to people about and that I think about is how much is the public sector, if you will, crowding out the private sector rather than assisting the private sector, because it's, to me, it's better to rise up and stand on your own, even if you're small, than try to get a piece of some big action. And I mean, I'm hoping to talk to some people about that topic while I'm here this time, because it's great that the country has, the PIF has so much money and is investing so much of it, not just abroad, but in the kingdom. But entrepreneurship, I think, is still the best source of a really sustainable private sector. Is to have an idea and go out and try to achieve it. And yes, be able to get access to funds, but to try to somehow get a piece of a great big wealthy tourism project. I don't know. I mean, I'm watching that because I think it will be interesting over.
There is an inherent tension between sort of letting things play out organically and having, the private sector bring out the best of the best, and sort of letting competition happen where, some people fail and some people succeed. And then the trade-off to that is, of course, the pace at which we're trying to change things. So
is the
pace at which we're trying to change. So, if you are rushing towards a very certain deadline of 2030, you do not have time for everyone to sort of take things slowly. So I think it makes sense for the public sector to be supporting it as much as it is today. And then the goal and the hope is that the private sector will be able to sort of carry this on their own eventually. And I think you see that happening in some sectors more than others currently. But I mean, energy, for instance, very interesting to see a lot of now different startups in the nuclear and the water space sort of hold their own and, create their own systems without any support from the government.
Yeah, and obviously the more they get, I would say, foreign investment and expertise that links up with some Saudi, and builds something that has, to me, I mean, I'm a capitalist, that has that's my definition of private sector, is people that are in business for themselves. I mean, in business to make money, and get a bigger and bigger return on investment if they can, but have to deal with the market and the competition. I'd like to make more, but I can't this year because I have to compete with you, so I lay off a few people and survive, and all those decisions that I think create a more sustainable, competitive private sector, and a good deal of the investing here is still big
It's a sovereign
PIF
fund.
investment. Yeah.
Your first book on Saudi Arabia you wrote, around 10 years ago, and now you're already writing a second book on Saudi. What made you decide, now is the time to write a second book, and where, what is the thesis of it that you think really brings to light the change that's happening here today?
Well, I wanted to for a long time. I mean, I have been trying to persuade the Crown Prince since I met him in 2016. Actually, I didn't start trying to persuade him until 2017. I would like to write about you. Where did you get your ideas? How did you grow up? What shaped you? So the why now is just that I think after nearly 8 years of struggling to learn things that I know enough. I mean, you never know enough, but that I can write something that would interest and educate people about what shaped the man who is reshaping Saudi Arabia, and how the man and the reshaping affect the world. So that's my goal, is to write a book that's not just about Vision 2030. It's about why you care, if you will, about the Crown Prince and Vision 2030. Because most Americans really, still all they know about Saudi Arabia, it used to be that women couldn't drive and women wore black and men wore white. And now about all they know is that women can drive, but they don't have any idea, what's going on in the country. So we continue to have a lot of negativity about Saudi Arabia.
'Cause you're also the former editor of the Wall Street Journal, so you've been in journalism for a very long time, and it is fair to say the press that Saudi gets feels overwhelmingly negative at times, particularly in the States. Do you think this is driven by, I mean, we talked about a couple of different factors, but what do you think it is exactly that causes such a gap between, the positive sentiment here and the largely negative one in the States?
For some reason, I think people just view the Saudis as being very different from us. And, I assumed that the first time I came. This is a very different country. And as I said, I kind of found it quite compatible. That, people were genuinely religious, not all of them, but many of them. And they were focused on their family. They had what I would call conservative values, and maybe because I grew up in a conservative home in a conservative state of Texas, conservative values didn't offend me. But I think somehow people in the U.S. just don't think the Saudis are like us. The French, even the Iranians, the Chinese. I mean, but there's something I think that people just feel is different about Saudi Arabia. And of course, to me, with all of these changes, I mean, it's, people just have no idea that Saudis are out dancing in the streets and, having fashion shows, and, women and men are going up in the elevator together, squeezed in, not in a panic because they're in the presence. And that when you check into a hotel, there's frequently a Saudi man and a woman standing side by side, which would have put them in deep trouble, 8 years ago, but no longer. They just can't. So, I'm only can hope to make a raindrop in but the more people kind of see and hear about what the country is really like, I think is good for Americans and good for Saudis. I like Saudis.
I think that is, every American who visits does end up loving it and enjoying not only the place, but particularly the people.
The people, yeah.
So it's really
they're so
exposure.
friendly now. I think the Crown Prince's big smile, which he, doesn't use in all the pictures that are in the buildings, which I think he probably should, because he has a few where he's just really smiling. It's very engaging, and I think Saudis have kind of taken on that friendliness. They used to be much more reticent because it wasn't good for your health necessarily to engage with foreigners. So people, they never were rude, but they weren't eager to engage, in my experience. And they're perfectly happy now to talk to you, to calm. I just find the transformation amazing. I think tourism is one of those things that will have an enormous positive impact, because when people come here, my granddaughter, my 14-year-old granddaughter I brought here, she lives in Alabama, and her friends ask her, did you have to wear an abaya? She said no. What struck you about, the difference of the people? And she said people were less self-absorbed than Americans, which I think is true. We're busy trying to stand out, to be different, and most Saudis are not busy trying to be different.
There's less of an individualistic culture here.
Much less of an individualistic culture.
You've been visiting the region for more than 40 years now. What are you, and we've talked about the changes that have taken place over the course of the times you've visited here. What are you most excited about for the future of Saudi Arabia? If we look another, even past Vision 2030, another 10, 20 years.
I think if he's of an age, he should be around for another 50 years. Maybe he will actually step aside at some point instead of, rule till he's 90. But if he sticks around, I think he has the potential to try to transform this region into something less contentious. But I think with some determination and luck, Saudi Arabia, with him, could potentially bring a more peaceful and prosperous region. He wants to do it, and I think by and large his record so far is what he wants, he manages to find a way to achieve. So I'm hoping he finds a way to achieve that.
I think we're all hoping. Well, thank you so much, Karen. This has been lovely.
You.
Great to have you here.
Thank you very much.